This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to listen to our podcast about weather. And if you can, give us a review about the Weather Lounge and any maybe future topics you would like for us to chat about. And as always, of course, joining me here in the Weather Lounge is my groovy co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey there, Brad. Groovy is getting a little bit out there.
Let's throw it back to the 70s and the 80s.
I guess. So yeah, Brad, another podcast here, and we have another great guest. I think this might be the first time we have a returning guest. Is that right?
Yeah, we have our first return guest. His name is Phil Harwood. He joined us here in the Weather Lounge back in March. And we didn't really get a chance to cover all the topics that we wanted to talk about. So we are going to have him back here in the Weather Lounge today.
Yeah, sounds good. And Snow and Ice Contractors, this one's for you, because with Phil back in our podcast here, we're going to finish our discussion. We started it back in March, talking about education and training in the snow and ice industry. But now we're going to get more into the nitty gritty of how to use your snowfall data from wherever you may find it, whether it's WeatherWorks or somewhere else, how to use that data to actually make those contracts and how it's going to help you in the long run make a competitive contract too. So Phil is, he represents three companies, the Snowfighters Institute, Grow the Bench, and also ProMotion Consulting. And he has a lot of experience in his arsenal to talk about these topics.
So without further ado, let's reintroduce my friend and yours, Phil Harwood. Welcome back, Phil.
Well, thanks for having me.
We had so much info to get to in March, and we didn't want to continue the podcast too much longer, and we just had to have you back, and we got to finish up where we started, I think.
Yeah, we started to talk a little bit about estimating and sales, and certainly we could talk for hours and hours on this, days, in fact. So I'm really glad and honored to be invited back to explore this topic in a little bit more detail.
And I'll tell you, you've gone through all the gamuts of not only consulting, but running different companies and managing. It's just, it all kind of goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
Yeah, thanks. It does. Yeah. And when I look back over, my career, I certainly couldn't have predicted in the beginning what I was going to be doing, even as a college student. You always think, what do you want to do when you grow up? But looking back on it, you can see all the connections. And, I think there's some common threads there that run through all those different parts of my career. And I grew up in a family business, so I've always been someone who has enjoyed working, really cared a lot about the people I work with and the organizational culture. That's always mattered a lot to me. And I think was a strong motivation to get into consulting, to really help people. And I'm really now starting to really help companies transition their ownership to the next generation, or to sell and get out and retire. And obviously we have an aging population. We have lots of owners who are in their 60s or 70s, and they're wanting to travel and spend time with grandchildren and looking for ways to exit. And so I'm really starting to focus more heavily on that, while still really investing a lot in not only my own consulting business, but Grow the Bench, and now the Snowfighters Institute, since Neil Galat and I acquired that business from the founder, John Allen, almost 2 years ago now.
I think I remember you took over. That was your first endeavor, kind of, wasn't it? You took over a company from, was it John Allen? I can't remember.
Well, Snowfighters Institute in particular was founded by John Allen.
Okay.
And so we acquired that business in the beginning of 2020, not knowing there was going to be a global pandemic. And so that was a pretty interesting time to acquire a business that was based on in-person training. But we made it through 2020. We did some online things. We had some workshops, and we started a podcast. So shameless plug for Snowfighters Institute podcast. Love to have you sign up for that as well. But no, it's been a good ride, and I really love the snow industry, and I love the people in it. So always happy to talk about snow.
Yeah, and I think the whole pandemic did open doors to things that I think companies never even would have thought of trying before. And I think we might have mentioned that before. But now that we are set up with all these fun new technology gadgets and podcasts and things like that, it's good that we have that in our arsenal. But Phil, let's bring it around to snow and ice some more. A lot of our clients are starting to work on some contracts and things for the upcoming winter. But now let's get a sense of where we are in the snow selling season. We're getting late in summer here. Um, you know, did this start months ago? This whole process, or is it just starting now? How does that work?
Well, so there's been a transition, and it's a really healthy transition toward signing contracts on more of a off-season basis. So I'll walk you through this. Before I started my consulting business, which has been 13 years now, when I was running a big landscape and snow business, we always prided ourselves that we started having snow meetings on, immediately after 4th of July. So like early July, we thought we were the greatest thing in the world because we were on top of it, And, today, if you started thinking about snow on the 4th of July, you're way behind the 8 ball because there's contracts already being signed because a lot of the forward thinking property managers and owners, they want snow contracts signed in the spring. If you think about just the natural progression of things, right? So as a snow contractor, you're providing your service in the winter. After the winter ends, the contract service period ends naturally as you move into spring in most markets. And then you have a time of assessment where you just think about, well, how do we do? How'd the season go? And you really want some time of reflection and analysis. You want to look at the profit margins of the accounts. You want to kind of think about the relationship. And you need a little bit of time to work on those things. And honestly, the customers do as well. And so kind of best optimal scenario would be you come out of the spring, you have a little bit of time to do that analysis and really assess what's going on here with this property. And then you move right into a renewal window and get the contract renewed. So that's probably, mid spring, late spring at the latest in that scenario where you're done. So if someone's rolling out mid-July or late July or beginning of August, contacting someone who, is on that time frame, you've missed it. You have to wait till next year. And if they signed a 3-year contract, now you're 3 years out.
So yeah, you better have those contracts pretty much in order before the last big snow pile melts almost.
Yeah, and the challenge with that is, a lot of times, we really want to update our contracts and our contract language and things. And so there's, with those customers that want the immediate renewal at the end of the spring, at the end of the winter, early spring, sometimes there's not time to get that into that cycle. But the nice thing about more and more property managers moving that decision-making time frame from late in the fall, right at crunch time, it just spreads out the whole selling cycle. So you really have to think about sales now from a 12-month perspective. There's probably always something from a snow selling perspective to do throughout the year. And I think that's true of the entire snow business. It's really a year-round business now. There are activities for every month that really need to be attended to. And the contractors who forget about snow for 4 months or 5 months or 6 months really get behind the 8 ball. And that's especially true this year with equipment because equipment is so hard to come by. So, contractors that are just now starting to think about equipment, probably that's great for next year, but not for this coming winter. So again, I know you asked about sales. So where are we in the selling process? Well, some contracts have already been signed. Some are in the process right now. There's still lots of companies that wait and don't sign contracts, don't even talk about snow until the fall. And that's fine. We're always going to have those for different reasons. But I think it's really healthy that it's being spread out because it just takes all that pressure off everything being signed in the fall.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like you're saying, how you're spreading out that sales process more because that happens with a lot of things. I'm even thinking back to us here at WeatherWorks. We talk about our products from our certified snowfall totals to our storm alerts. And once that winter's over, we're already doing, surveys on staff and clients and seeing where we can improve, seeing where, we can take that product, because we need to know that information so that we can work on it all summer and be ready for the next snow season. So it's definitely a year long process for us, the same way it is for the snow contractors. And I mean, heck, we're already getting into our first winter outlooks for the season, and it's quite interesting how that all plays together. Now, I just wanted to bring it back one time here, Phil. You said about equipment being hard to come by right now. And now, what are you exactly talking about there? Are you talking about your plows or your trucks? Because I know there's a shortage with new vehicles that is happening too. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, just globally in the supply chain, there's shortage of raw materials. So steel is hard to come by. Components are hard to come by. All manufacturing took a big hit last year and is just trying to catch up. So if you read business journals, you've read about supply chain problems. If you're trying to get a container off a ship in Long Beach, California, it's sitting there for months before anyone's taken that container off that ship. So, if you need parts that are coming from some foreign land, good luck. And so, there are certainly manufacturers that manufacture things here in the States, but, we're in a global economy. Everything's connected and everything got behind and everyone's trying to catch up. So it's a very difficult scenario.
What about staffing right now, Phil? Have you had any hardships with that? Just with the whole, we know that the workforce across the U.S. there's jobs available everywhere. I mean, and there's a lot of businesses that aren't able to fulfill their entire staffing. Is that going to be an issue, you think, going into this upcoming winter for anyone or even you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably our third podcast. But just my 2 cents on this is,
without bringing politics involved, we all know there's a work shortage. Yeah.
No. There are demographic realities that are happening. I talked about the aging population. We have an aging population. People are getting older. There's not too many 60 and 70-year-olds who want to, operate a skid steer and go plow snow. Now, there are some, and they're really cool, but there's not many. And so, and I think just in our educational system, I think there's been a lot of work in this area, but there's a lot more to do to really value trades over, going to college and getting a degree in basket weaving, for $100,000 in debt, So, I think those are some significant demographic trends that are not in our favor. And I think, and then you pile on, COVID and immigration, and you're getting into, legislation and, things like that. So there's just a lot going against us there. There are contractors that are doing a great job, creating great cultures and really doing all the things. You need to be recruiting year round now, and you can't just do one thing. You have to do 10 things. And so, it used to be recruiting was really easy. Now it's not. It's year round. It's 10 things. It's culture. It's understanding the generational changes from your generation, my generation. There's a different mindset now with an employee. And if you don't appreciate that and understand that and speak to that mindset, you're going to miss the mark. And what's going to happen is you're just going to blow through people, and you're just going to say, well, none of these people are any good. Well, okay. All right. Good luck.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like an answer that's going to be very.
So that's my 2 cents. Yeah. On labor.
So let's back up and let's go into the back into the snow contract process here. Now, you mentioned that a lot of companies might wait until the fall before they start making decisions on what they're going to do, and even property managers and owners. So, why is this? Why does this happen? Why does it get put off until the fall and not done in late spring, like in your ideal world?
Yeah, I think the most obvious reason is, or the most common reason is that that's just the way they've always done it, and no one's given them a good reason to change. So I think that's an opportunity for us as professionals in our industry to really talk with our clients and prospects about the benefits of, not just for us but for them, the benefits of moving away from fall and especially late fall, and moving toward multi-year contracts. So, there are just lots of benefits, from reduced administrative burden to reducing the learning curve, fewer mistakes, a lot more reliability and consistency, but also benefiting the contractor benefiting the customer. Some of the benefits to the contractor benefit the customer. There you go. That's what I was trying to say. For example, you sign a contract with me early enough, I can procure equipment, I can dedicate people to your site, I can build routes around you, I can make sure you're taken care of. If you're the last customer that I sign up in the fall, I'm trying to jam you in somewhere. I'm putting duct tape and, you know what I mean, on this thing. Like I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to do a great job, but if you would have signed that contract 3 months ago, I could have really taken care of you in a whole different way. So that's a true statement, but most of our customers don't understand that. So but then I think, there's in my experience, there's lots of properties that sometimes property managers, these big property management firms, they get overlooked because they reassign properties between property managers, or they bring on new properties and their Excel spreadsheets aren't up to date. And so sometimes they don't even know what they have or what they don't have. And so, we ran into that a lot, where we'd get all these last minute properties because the customer didn't even know they existed, or they didn't realize they weren't on someone's list. So that happens. And then just internal politics. If something is the way it is, it's built into their internal procedures, their internal timeframes and calendars, with all the other things that they have to do and report, and you're asking them to make a significant change, that can be very difficult to do because there's so many people involved with making a big change like that, especially in a big management company. But it can be done. I've seen it happen. But it begins with helping them understand why that's important to them. So I think that's a fight worth having. Because if nothing else, you can help them understand that because you are the latest person I signed up, don't come to me and talk to me about, I don't want to hear all your little pet peeves, because, I'm taking care of the person that, signed my contract back in May.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I wouldn't even have thought of that aspect of everything. But I want to bring it around to here at WeatherWorks. We like to produce, snow climatologies, or something we call snowtistics, where we provide a lot of seasonal data, a lot of event data, and things like that for people who are trying to get their snow contracts in order. And I know we talked a little bit about, in the past, but we didn't really go into depth of, why this weather data is so important in your sales process. So maybe you could help us go through the connection here between that data and how you utilize that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's several pieces to this. So we're going to have to spend a few minutes going through talking about different contract types and probabilities and some of the other statistical, components of weather data that you're referring to. But I just want to, I guess, my first thought was the reality here when it comes to weather and risk and contract types for snow and ice management is that most property managers really are not that aware or educated about snow and ice management. And that shouldn't be a surprise to us, because why would they be? They're not contractors. They're not expected to be experts in snow and ice management. in the same way that they're probably not master electricians or master plumbers or, how to tear apart an HVAC system. Like, they have people for that, right? They have contractors who have that expertise. So at best, they're generalists. They have general knowledge of things, but if they're newer, they probably don't even have that. So we really have a great opportunity to educate them, and people love talking about weather. So when you bring weather data, especially if it pertains to their budget, and I'll help you see how this pertains to their budget. They love talking about weather statistics, and some of those reports that you guys produce are phenomenal. As an aside, we've had 2 Snowfighters events, and you guys have provided weather statistic reports. I'm sorry, what's the brand name?
Snowtistics.
Snowtistics. I love that. Snowtistics. It just wasn't on the top of my tongue, but you guys provided Snowtistics reports for all of our attendees, and you should have seen how people lit up when they saw their zip code and their data. They just love it. So thank you for that. But
yeah, no problem. Anytime.
But customers, they really love seeing this data because it's historical, it's accurate. And as soon as they realize, oh, this affects my contract, this affects my risk, this affects my budget, then they're really interested. But we have to bring that to them. We have to educate them. And so I think we have to be aware first. I guess this is my first answer to that. Most property managers, most of our customers don't know much about this at all. And some of our contractors don't know all that much about all those connections. So we really have to start with ourselves. We need to become educated so that we can educate our customers about how important weather data is and all of this.
Yeah, I mean that sounds incredibly important. And if you want to say Snowtistics one more time, that'd be awesome, because let's just keep plugging that brand name.
You just did. Well, let me take the next piece of it. So you were going to ask me. I'm just going to go for it because I know. So the next piece of this is probability. That's what this really centers on. That's like the linchpin of all this. So, probability is that's a big word. So what does that mean? That's the likelihood that something will happen. So if I flip a coin, what are the odds it's going to land on heads or tails? Well, it's 50-50, right? Let's talk about a snow scenario. I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now. 74.9 inches is our average snowfall. But our highest snowfall recorded, since we've been keeping records here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was 143.7 inches. That was in 2008. Okay. So what's the likelihood that this coming winter, we're going to have more than 143.7 inches? It's not very good.
Yeah, pretty low, I'd say.
It's very low, yeah.
Is it zero? It's probably not zero statistically. I mean, it could happen. We could have another record, right? I guess there's always another record. But the odds are we're not going to be above 143 inches, okay? That'd be a very, very unlikely scenario. What are the odds that we're going to be at 74.9 inches or higher? Is that 50%?
Probably 50-50, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably 50-50. We can argue about, average versus median and all that stuff. But, roughly, if you just say, well, half the snows are going to be above 75 inches and half are going to be below 75 inches. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what about a 60% probability or 70% or an 80%? Let's say here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I don't know if this is true or not. I didn't run the numbers, but let's say an 80% probability is 100 inches. Well, that would be a really important thing to have a conversation with a client about, especially if we're building a snow contract with a cap at 80 inches, where we would be able to say to this customer, there's an 80% chance based on all this awesome weather data that I'm showing you here from WeatherWorks, that this winter coming up, this winter right here, is going to be 100 inches or less, 80% chance. There's only a 20% probability we're going to go over 100 inches. Statistically, that's a statistical fact. No, I have no idea. It might be 150 inches. We might have 3 inches. I have no idea. No idea what the actual is going to be. We're not talking about actual. We're talking about probability. But that number right there, those are extremely valuable numbers. And so to be able to talk about 80% probability, 70% probability, 60% probability, especially when they're related to caps, we can have intelligent conversations about pricing. We can have intelligent conversations about risk, because wherever you put that number, there's risk. No matter what your contract says, no matter what your form of contract is, somebody has risk. But does everyone understand, everyone sitting around the table understand exactly who has what risk and how much risk? If they don't, you're not communicating it to them, because there's no reason they shouldn't know. All the information's there. All the numbers are there. What you have to do as a contractor is understand how to explain that to a customer. And then you can have an intelligent conversation about the different contract options and how to reduce the risk that's important to them, because there's different levels of risk. And if they're not aware of what they are, they can't make an intelligent decision, and neither can you.
Now, do you ever bring up the fact that, all right, let's say there's 75 inches now. Does that happen? Is it skewed because maybe you got a 2-foot storm and then a bunch of 4-inch storms? I mean, does the event number ever dictate certain things on the contract? I'm sure it does, but do you get that 75 inches is what I'm saying between 15 events, or is it 30 smaller events or something like that?
Yeah. So the event data by increment. So if we said, if we did 2-inch increments and we said, well, how many events do we have for a 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, all that, right? That's what you're talking about. That is certainly going to factor in when we're doing seasonal pricing, and we can show that to a customer and explain to them how the math works behind the scenes. I think that's cool, especially if you have a engineering type customer who's really hands-on.
Right, that's where our certified snowfall totals come in too, because it'll show the event number.
Absolutely.
Versus how much fell.
So we need all that data to build the seasonal price. So that's baked into the total price. But I think that's probably, unless you have a very, like I said, a detail-oriented customer, they're probably not going to want to drop down to that level. They're probably going to want to talk about seasonal numbers, total numbers for the season. And then what you're going to show them is different prices based on that, right? Now, if you're giving them per event prices, that's a different thing. But the number of events per increment, that's going to go into that seasonal price.
Right. I like how you were explaining probability earlier with the seasonal totals, because probability sometimes is a hard concept to understand. A lot of people want deterministic stuff. They want to know black or white, what's going to happen. Obviously we deal with this all the time, being meteorologists. So it's interesting that you talked about probability, but I could see where that's going and the usefulness. If you have that data in hand as a contractor showing a potential client, that's a lot of power there. That's a lot of leverage you have. Look, I'm being straightforward. This is what the truth is about your site. This is how much snow does fall. And I could see the correlation even with our, when we do our seasonal outlooks. If we're going to say, hey, we probably going to be heading towards an above average winter, then maybe you can lean those contracts towards those higher numbers, and you can move it around that way. It's really, you're giving me a lot of insight here on how this process works, which I like, and I'm sure our listeners like too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think where a lot of contractors get kind of stuck in their mind is they oversimplify this whole risk reward trade-off thing with weather and contract types. And they think, well, there's first of all, they say everything evens out over a period of time. So, I've heard this thousands of times, over a 3-year period, everything goes back to the average. Okay. Well, most of the time it does, but that's fine. But when it comes to cash flow, can you survive those imbalances? Let's talk about your bank account. That's a different story. We need to think about risk from two perspectives. There's the risk of the contract to the contractor, and then there's the risk to the client. They're usually inverse relationships. And that's where people oversimplify this. So they think, okay, if I have a seasonal contract, obviously if it's a heavy winter, the customer is going to get a huge benefit because they're paying a flat fee. Contractor is going to have, they're going to get hurt, right? If it's if 150 inches here in Grand Rapids, seasonal contract, I'm going to get hurt, no cap. And just the inverse is true on a light winter, right? And then if we have a per event, any type of per event, per inch, per whatever, doesn't matter, fill in the blank, per something. If we have a light winter, the contractor is out of business because they have no revenue. If we have a heavy winter, the customer blew their budget and they get fired, right? Because, so those are the two extremes, right? So, and everyone says, well, it's just the way it is, it all works it out in the end. But, and that was good logic 30 years ago, but that doesn't make any sense anymore because there's way more, there's much more data available about risk and like all this cool weather data. We can easily go to a customer and explain to them, there's no reason to have all this risk. There's no reason for you to take on that risk on either side. There's no reason for us as a contractor to take all this risk on. And that's where you can start bringing in contracts with caps and floors or per occurrence contracts with retainers. We can show all the math and we can show the impact on the risk and how many inches we are exposed and why you're paying what you're paying. So now we have real numbers, we have real data based on real weather history. The math is right in front of their face and they can understand it. And that's a much healthier scenario. If I'm bidding against someone who has a unlimited seasonal price, I can crush them because I can reduce my seasonal price with a cap. Now, you might say, well, a customer won't accept a cap. Well, that's because they don't understand it. And they don't understand how it benefits them. They will accept it when they understand how it benefits them.
I mean, I'm glad you're talking about all this. I mean, I feel like that the whole scenario of this is how it's always been, this is how we've always done it, and it evens out in the end. That sounds like a terrible answer. And if I were trying to say somebody was bidding something to me and said something to that effect to me, well, guess what? I'm going down the road and I'm going to talk to XYZ contractor over here because they have more data to support what they're trying to sell me for my contract. So I would not want to hear this is how it's always been sort of thing.
Well, I think it's an excuse, and it gives someone the license to not become educated, not put in all that extra work, to really be able to equip themselves to go have this type of conversation with a client. Because there's a learning curve there. If someone's listening to the podcast and they're scratching their head going, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. There's a learning curve to really wrap your head around this and get your hands on at your accurate weather data to begin with, to really understand these probabilities, really understand different contract scenarios and start doing some pro forma hypotheticals and looking at pricing and then really testing it with your client base and saying, are my clients going to accept these contract forms, and listening to them, because you might have to do some tweaking, some adjusting, but that's what I like about this is all math. It's all math and it's all, statistics. So there's an art to selling, but it's really nice to have something concrete that you can hold on to when you're in a selling situation.
So let me ask you this, Phil. If I were a contractor and I am just at a loss for where to start as far as making my contracts, where would I go to get educated on how to make contracts and, that sort of thing?
Well, with risk of sounding like I'm promoting my own companies, I'm going to promote Snowfighters Institute because we have events that are designed specifically for this, and we have some incredible information at Grow the Bench as well. But I think a larger answer that's not self-serving would be to join a peer group, really get involved in the industry. If you're not attending industry events, not going to trade shows, not sitting in roundtable meetings, not plugging in, there's so much support out there. There's so many people that are willing to share what they have. You just have to get connected to them. And so these industry events, industry associations are a great place to meet people and network. And that's why I love these Snowfighter events. They're networking events, and people connect and trade stories and share data. And I've never seen so many people be so willing to share as I have in the snow industry. I mean, it's incredible. Like, yeah, you want my contracts? Here they are. You want my estimating templates? Here they are. Like, it's crazy. You just got to get connected.
So, Phil, you talked about some contracts. You talked about like a little bit about per inch contracts. You talked about seasonal contracts. So if we compared those two, what are kind of the pitfalls in each one of those? What's the pros? What's the cons of those types of contracts?
Yeah, really it comes down to the extremes. You want to take the extremes off both of those types of contracts. So with seasonal contracts, the best seasonal contract is a limited seasonal contract that has a cap in it, and it also has a floor. So there's a give back on the low end, because now we have a defined range that's a fixed price, and the customer understands that. So if you're at 80% as a probability is the high end and 20 on the low end, the customer's flat fee within that range, they're understanding that, hey, I'm protected in a huge percentage of the probability for the upcoming winter. If we go past that threshold, I'm going to pay a little bit more, and I should. And as a contractor, your expenses are going to be much higher because you're going to have a lot more material usage. Your labor is going to be higher. You're going to have more wear and tear in your vehicles. Gas is expensive. So, if we start getting into a super heavy winter here in Grand Rapids, if we start getting into, over 100 inches, 120, 130 inches, and you're a contractor here in Grand Rapids, your expenses are double what they would have been in a normal winter. So is it fair that the customer should pay a little bit more? Of course it is. That's only reasonable. And the nice thing about that is then you can bring down that seasonal price for that customer because you're taking off the risk at the high end above the cap. And so I really like that contract form. And then, a lot of customers don't even want to talk about any type of fixed price seasonal contracts. They want per event contracts. So build in a retainer. And I think there's an easy story there to tell, because you have a huge investment as a contractor. You've been to trade shows all summer. You've bought equipment. You've bought materials way in advance of the season. You've hired people. You've trained them. You've repainted equipment. You've moved equipment around. You've made a massive investment just to get ready to take care of the customer. And if it never snows, the customer shouldn't pay you for any of that. You've spent tens of thousands of dollars to equip yourself to be ready for the customer. And now you're on standby. Now you're ready for the snow. You're not sleeping. You're up all night waiting for it to snow. The customer should pay something for that. You have lease payments. You're making payments on your equipment. You're making payments on that salt, or your bank account's gone. Your war chest.
This is the retainer you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can just bill against the retainer as a current. But if it never snowed, or if we had that super light winter, there should be some baseline payment that's paying that contractor for being on call. I love the comparison of the fire department, right? So the fire department's always there. They're in the guys are in the firehouse ready to go. And we pay for that in our taxes. Even if we never have a fire, we're happy to pay for it, because when we do have an event, they're there. It's the exact same thing. And I think more and more snow contractors are seeing themselves as emergency personnel. And I just love that correlation there.
So is that how you go about explaining to the client of if there's no snow? Is that because I'm looking at it? So say I have a property that I need serviced, And then this guy's telling me that, well, if it doesn't snow all year, I still have to pay him. And I'm looking at that going, wow, what I got to pay him for, that sort of thing. So is that what you do?
Yeah. So you have to walk them through it. You have to explain to them the level of investment that you're making. I'm not saying you have to show them your P&L, but, I think a reasonable customer would understand there's a massive investment that a contractor is making on their behalf that they're responsible for paying for, even if it doesn't snow, because they're benefiting from that. There's a material benefit to that client, even if it doesn't snow, because you're an insurance policy at that point. And insurance policies are not free. You pay for insurance. So if there's a material benefit that they're not willing to pay for, you're talking to the wrong customer. You need to pack up your stuff and leave.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, especially when you bring in the insurance analogy too, because obviously you're paying for car insurance on your car. You may never have an accident, but if you do, you're really going to want that insurance to pay the, $3,000, $5,000 or whatever it is to fix your vehicle.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense as an insurance policy. I mean, you have to have it if you need. If you're a zero tolerance site, you have to have that insurance policy with the snow removal.
And on top of that, there's the liability issue. So they're shifting liability to the contractor intentionally right in their contract. And so what does that mean for the contractor? Well, the contractor has to be protected then. So not only does the contractor need insurance, if there's any event, we have liability. As a contractor, we're exposed. We have liability there. So, there's just, when you start really going through all those different talking points, there's a lot there to talk about. Again, a reasonable customer would understand this. They would appreciate it. They go, yeah, this totally makes sense. Unreasonable customer doesn't care because there's some other contractor out in the hallway waiting to come in. And when you leave, that's fine. Take them. I'm out. Now, with that being said, I'm being a little facetious here. If you have a real nice balanced portfolio and you have different contract mixes and you have lots of different types of contracts that have caps and floors and retainers, can you sustain an unlimited no retainer contract? Of course you can, because you've mitigated that risk in a larger portfolio. But if that's all you have, then you're really exposed.
I'm sure that's very highly dependent too about where you're servicing too. I mean, versus somewhere in Kentucky versus somewhere in New England, it's going to be a huge difference. Maybe that retainer. You'd
be surprised. You'd be surprised at how contractors in some of those lower snow areas are able to sell seasonal contracts. You'd be shocked.
Well, yeah, I would imagine, because then maybe you don't get as many pure snow events. Maybe you get a lot of mixed events, which in essence could even be more dangerous because you have freezing rain and things like that, and refreeze versus where you just get a lot of snow, which is, are you going to go plow the snow and clean up the snow versus where you're going to get, a lot of different events where you can have a lot of icy scenarios.
So Brad brings up a good point about ice storms and sleet and things like that. Now, is that something you recommend to your clients, to put in some sort of clause about ice storms and those type of things?
Yeah, that's one of the big ones. I think that there's a handful of things that I think are really important that contractors need to get in their contracts. That's one of them, to talk about ice specifically, because if you think about just the comparison, if you just Googled, how many inches of ice does that equate to in inches of snow? It's a shocking number, right? So I have clients who have actually baked that into their snow totals. So if there is an ice event, it actually is cranking up their snow total significantly for the year toward that seasonal cap because of that formulation. The other way to approach this is make any ice event completely outside of the contract, totally a separate event. It's not a snow event. It's not part of the seasonal totals. Our snow event pricing doesn't apply. It's all T&M. It's just a complete separate animal. It's not included anywhere here in our contract coverage. So that's one of them, and there's a handful of other ones that I think are really important to get in there, like drifting, responsibility for inspecting properties between events and the liability associated with that. How, expectations for daytime operations and even just decision making responsibilities and the liability associated with that. So we could probably spend a whole nother podcast doing contract clauses. And actually, I've given some educational sessions specifically on these contract clauses that really need to be articulated specifically. And a lot of times they're missing from contracts. And that's one of the first things I do when I start working with someone is go through their contracts and make sure they have all the right language in them.
Right. And I mean, I was talking, mainly about, ice, and I'm talking about a glaze of ice that goes on everything. But there's times where we have clients calling about sleet. And what we're talking about with sleet, just to clarify, that sleet is those little balls of ice. It's basically looks like frozen raindrops that just accumulate on everything. It looks like BBs or ball bearings that are really small. And it becomes really dense to move, and it's really hard to move, and it falls off your plow and all that kind of stuff. So is there a difference there too between the ice storm and that dense sleet?
If you can define it, and there's a actual definition of something like sleet, why wouldn't you? And it's likely, it's probably going to happen. Why wouldn't you talk about that in your contract? Explain what it is, explain how you're going to handle it. Is it part of the contract and covered in my pricing, or is it not covered in my pricing? We should be very specific about these things.
And I think that's too where a lot of people have to educate themselves on what these precipitation types are. I mean, we've done blogs about it. We've done podcasts about the different winter precipitation types to explain to people what it is, because there's still confusion out there. Is it sleet? Is it hail? What do you mean by freezing rain? What do you mean by a freeze up at night or a refreeze? So we try to educate as much as possible what's actually going on here, so they just understand and then can use that in their contracts.
Well, in my experience, most property managers don't care what you would call it. if it's coming out of the sky and it's making the parking lot icy, you're taking care of it. So in that situation, what we need to do is we need to be really smart about those values that we're building into our pricing models, so we have enough occurrences to cover all those events. If we know that we're going to get some 5 sleet events a year, well, we better build that into our pricing.
Right. And that's something that we try to display too. Our Snowtistics product isn't just about snow. It's about those mixed events too, and about those ice events and how many ice events you may be seeing over the years. So you can plan for that in addition. Phil, we talked about a lot of things here. I think we covered about all our topics that we were planning on today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us here before we wrap things up? Because I know we already have podcast 3 and 4 already slated.
Again, I just really appreciate the opportunity. I love to talk about snow. So anytime you guys want me to come back, I'll come back.
We'll just make Phil an honorable co-host. That's all.
Yeah, there you go. I would like to just personally invite everyone to our upcoming event. We have, I'm not sure when this podcast is going out, but if it's hitting before our event, we have an event September 8th and 9th at Milton Cat. That's in Milford, Massachusetts, for Snowfighters. Registration's open right now at snowfightersinstitute.com. And this is an event focused on event management, equipment, site planning, special ops, all the fun stuff. And we'll talk about weather there as well. But that'll be a great event. If you can make it, we'd love to have you.
I just got podcast number 5, equipment, site management.
There you go. Yeah.
Site planning. We're going to talk about that yet too.
Special ops.
Winter starts, I think. Yeah, special ops. I like
special ops.
Good. That's a great title. Special ops in snow removal. I like it. 100%.
If you don't know what that is, you got to come out September 8th and 9th. You'll learn all about it.
So visit the Snowfighter Institute's event in September. There at Milton Cat in Milford, Massachusetts, if you want to know some more. But hey, Phil, thanks a lot for being with us again. I really appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
So remember, guys, this is the Weather Lounge, and every 2 weeks we'll have a new podcast. So please visit back. And also, drop us an email at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com if you have any suggestions for the show. I was going to say for the snow, but since we were talking so much about that. Also, give us a review. That really helps everything get pushed forward so that more and more people could learn about the Weather Lounge, learn about weather, and learn how that may affect their business and what they do in their daily lives. So until the next time, this is the Weather Lounge, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.